Hello and welcome to AILTV. I'm a man called Jay, and in this program I am going to be talking about Penha, an NGO which was formed 30 years ago and it is still running. Right, and you might ask yourself, yes, what is Penha? Penha stands for Pastoral and Environmental Network in the Horn of Africa. Yes, Horn of Africa. What is the Horn of Africa? Many of us do not know, but if you don't know, now you will know. The Horn of Africa is Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. And that's where Penha organization is working. And they have been doing that for 30 years. And also, we have to congratulate them that 2021, Penha will be celebrating 30 years of engagement. Now that is big. Yeah. Right, so let us move on. Penha was founded by a gentleman called Dr. Zeremariam Fre. I know he doesn't like to be called a doctor. He prefers himself as Zere. He says that that is very simple. He wants to keep it simple. But also we know he's an associate professor at UCL London. Yes, Dr. Zere, please don't blame us. You know you have worked very hard. You have got all these gigantic titles, and we get excited. So if you allow me throughout this video, I will be addressing you as Dr. Zere. And well, there is nothing wrong with that. You earned it. So now, for those who doesn't know Penha, as I said earlier on, let us go quickly to their website where you can browse. You see, this is their website here. It will tell you about them. You will find out what they do. They are doing amazing work, and the website is a professional one, very well laid. You're going to find out so many things that you want to know about Penha. So let us move on. Now, 2 years ago, Dr. Zere, he won an award, and this was the Desmond Tutu Reconciliation Fellowship, and that's very big. That's very gigantic. You see, if you don't know about this award, please Google it. It happens every year. Now, in 2018, Dr. Zere won it. We got really excited for those who know him. So while he was away, Bereket Tesge, the trustee of Penha, and AILTV, who is me, we decided let us put a small get-together to welcome him. But also, not only to welcome him, but we wanted to know what has he brought back. What is that award all about? Now, one thing that I must tell you is this. When you are talking to Dr. Zere, whether you are having a private conversation, whether he's speaking in a group, or wherever he is, he will always talk about peace and reconciliation. Now, when you look around now, the whole of Africa, all regions in Africa need peace and reconciliation. I don't want to go in. As for that one, I don't have to go into details. You know where the problems are and where the troubles are. So, the video that is coming up was recorded at the Africa Center, and our host was Nicole Kenton, who is also a trustee of Penha. So I hope you are going to enjoy this video, because the whole talk, he was talking about peace and reconciliation. So please enjoy the video.
We are advocates for pastoral people. We are the first African non-governmental organization working throughout the region of the Horn of Africa. Most of you know where the Horn of Africa is, 220 million people along the Red Sea coast and East Africa. Various livelihoods, farming, agriculture, fisheries, and so forth. We focus on the pastoral people of the Horn because they are a big population, almost 30 million of them, economically very active, environmentally sustaining large chunks of land. We have been working, advocating on their behalf, questions of land issues, nomadic education, nomadic health, gender issues, and also capacity building for several line ministries, government ministries. When we started, there wasn't a single NGO, African NGO. Now there are more than 50 non-governmental organizations, local associations throughout the Horn of Africa. So we're very happy, we're very proud. Coming back to the Desmond Tutu Award, I received this award acknowledging the Penha's work in the region, and I received it on behalf of the pastoral people and the colleagues throughout the region, working in many of the countries. The award has a very special meaning to me personally because I come from a region which is, as you know, troubled in many ways, where reconciliation and cooperation between peoples is where the future lies. So by receiving this award, I would like to be an instrument in collaboration and peacemaking and reconciliation in our region. And this is the mission and the purpose. I would also like to help Penha in its new directions. Very grateful to all the trustees who are here, and also to JJ. Also very grateful to my wife, who has been a comrade with me all the time, along many years. So I'm very happy to take up questions, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions, or shall I kick off with one? Zere, going way back to when you were growing up, what first inspired you to advocate for pastoral people? What was your inspiration? Who was your role model, maybe, when you were a child or growing up?
Luckily, in the part of Eritrea where I was born and brought up, it was a multicultural, multi-ethnic town. We have Eritrean groups from all the country, and we have also Somalis, Armenians, Yemenis, West Africans, you name it. That small town called Karen, the Western Lowlands, was really a meeting place, a microcosm. And we spoke several languages. We were a mix of Christian and Muslims in the same town. So we have several languages, and I managed to speak 5 languages in the same town. What inspired me at the time was this multiplicity of the societies we have, and the ability to tolerate different ideologies, different thinking, different ethnicities. And I didn't know that when Penha was established later on in my life, I didn't know that was going to help me a lot, you know, the languages, the cultural diversity, which represents the region very widely. So that was one thing. Of course, my mother was a tough woman. She was my main role model. She educated me, sent me to a mission school, and strong women. And I think my attitude in Penha and promoting philosophy towards women, whether they are pastoral or whether they are rural, comes from that, and because I had a role model in my home.
Thank you. Anyone have any other questions? Well, let's continue that journey then. So you grew up in Eritrea, then you came across to England. What brought you to England?
Yeah, I left Eritrea quite young. I was only 21 years, and I went to Italy in the first place. I flew on the very last Alitalia airline. After that, I think the war has escalated, and I should have also said that the part of Eritrea where I was born and brought up was also a war zone in the 60s. So witnessed a lot of atrocities in our town. And afterwards, the war has expanded throughout Eritrea. But in the beginning, the 60s, early 70s, our town was a battleground between the Ethiopian army and the liberation fighters of Eritrea. And I had a very direct experience of those atrocities, and I've seen it happening in our hometown. curfew is 4 o'clock, all those nasty things you can think about. I think as a child, you either become so embittered in your life or you reconcile with those kind of feelings. In my case, I think I reconciled a long time ago. So I left Eritrea at the age of 20, went to Italy as a young man. I spent there 3 years, and I studied philosophy and theology. And then just a good excuse, as a young man, Italy was great at the time. And then I found my wife to be there, my girlfriend, Eritrean, who is here now. So we came to England as two youngsters, just hoping to be educated, has education. That was the ambition. We had no degrees. You came here very early. And then I think UK was a great experience. I have 3 levels in my life in the UK. One is the earlier part, where you come here as a youngster, you're just ambitious. All you want to know is you want to study agriculture. In my case, because I didn't have the A levels of this country, I ended up working in the countryside, for 3 years to make up for not having A levels. So that was a fantastic exposure to the British society. I mean, where you're in London, you have no idea how the rural people live here. I think the countryside here is amazing. First of all, I learned the language. I met a lot of these innocent villages in the small towns, small areas, and it was fantastic exposure. Where you come from, I think in a place like London, you cannot really. And England is also very feudal to me. The land tenure system, all those farms being leased, not rented, not owned. You learn a lot. So I had that exposure, and then I went for my degree in higher education. I ended up in the Royal Agricultural College, and then I came to University of Reading, where I did my master's and PhD. So that was really the second phase of my life. And I think when I did my master's and PhD at Reading University, I wanted to do something about nomadism, pastoralism. That's what took me to Penha, And then, of course, in 1989, the idea of setting up Penha came. And then me and a group of other colleagues, I just have to say that our generation in those days was kind of crazy generation, We came as youngsters, all we thought about country, home, love for country, You educate yourself and go back home, that's all. We didn't come here to settle down. It's unbelievable, So they end up that the motivation to take Penha back to the region was from that principle, that we want to go to our region. And Penha was a very convenient forum, instrument, to bring the like-minded people and then set up a regional office in Addis. And then, unfortunately, I think at the time there was a conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and we lost our regional office at the time because that conflict was very vicious, to the extent that the population on both sides were affected, although there was very little hatred between the population per se. So then the challenge of moving Penha forward by having more offices in the different countries and decentralizing it became another challenge. Now, after all that journey, this award came at the right time, and I really like to thank especially Barakat, who is here. I would like to embarrass him today. He is the one actually our director now, he is the one who said to me, Zeremariam, something is going on, are you interested? I had no idea, I could have missed it, if it wasn't for him. So I would like to, express my deepest gratitude to him for Barakat is very techy, he knows all these things happening all over the place. So he told me that, and I am grateful to him. I would like to say it publicly for the first time. So coming back to the award now, Desmond Tutu was my role model, and I think he is the kind of guy who resolved many issues within himself. South Africa, apartheid, and all those. I think his vision of challenging authority, even to date, at the age of 90, he goes to all the politicians in the ANC and tells them off. He even came to London several times, local authorities, and telling people, look, this is wrong, How many people are around who can say that, with that courage? So his courage was very much, and I think with this award now, I would like to be at least further peace in our region for the next generation, and because I think our region is basically deficit. It has peace deficit, you know. People tell you about famine, the African image. I mean, I think our region has fundamental issues which are to do with peace and cooperation. I think this is a region which is very civilization-wise, very old. We were Christianized around the 4th century. I don't know how many know this. We got Islam. We received Islam in the 6th century. So the region is actually rich, you know, a whole range of historical everything. If you dig the ground in the Horn of Africa, you find something out, you know. Beyond these political borders, you know, sovereign borders, okay, we even fight over them. But I think the region is rich. It has so much to give: art, literature, history, cross-border trade, civilizations, you know, across borders. Well, somehow we got mixed up in the last 40 years, and I think we could do we can reverse the trend, you know, in bringing peace into the region and stability for the people. Thank you.
You were in the region recently, weren't you, Zere? And it was quite a historic moment with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia announcing that he would open up the borders. What does this mean for you now? I mean, you spoke a little bit about your ambitions for peace, but what's the next steps for you, and how will you use this award to further that?
I think, as I said, this region our region is full of wounds. You know, if people are honest to themselves and really check. And I'll tell you a story why I think this region is wounded. When I was in Eritrea in 1992, after the end of the war, I met a guy from Begemidr in Ethiopia, you know, an old man. He lost 4 of his sons in the war, and he came to my hometown looking for them, you know. His wife told him, can you just go and find these boys, 4 of them from the same family. And of course he was lost. The guys, there's no record where they died, how they died. They died in the war. And then he came and he was lost and I spoke a bit of Amharic, and I told him, asked him, are you okay? And he said to me, my wife, mother of my kids, told me that 4 of these boys died in Eritrea, soldiers, you know, part of the Ethiopian army. And I was quite touched by that story, you know. And then he said, I know I can't find any, I cannot find them alive, but even if I find any traces of them, you know, could be a helmet, whatever it is. And I took him to one of the battle zones where there's a lot of soldiers died, and I knew that a place called Afabat for the Eritreans. So I took him, I drove him to the town where there was a valley, they had a big war at the end of that war. And he was able to pick up some of the helmets, you know, because there were heaps of helmets. What happens at the time when the soldiers die, you just bury them, maybe in mass graves, and then the helmets were put aside, 50, 100, 200 helmets. And then this man actually picked up 4 helmets, you know. Then he said, these probably belong to my sons. So if I go back to Gondar, my hometown, at least I could give the mother something, that I've been there and I've. So he picked up 4 helmets, you know. And I think for me that was quite a turning point in a way. You know why? Because it's only when you realize how the other party is wounded that you can actually make peace within yourself, you know. Otherwise you can dance over dead bodies of other people and you can say, I won. But actually it's quite important for me. That guy really taught me a big lesson in my life, by the way, as far as reconciliation goes. Because reconciliation goes both sides, if you see what I mean. So coming back to the question by Nicole, yes, I think as I said, we have a lot of problems in the region. A lot of them has to do with politics, of course. But deep down, it has to do with settling disputes, you know, deep down. Settling disputes, not only political disputes, but social disputes, you know. Ethiopia is now going through a major change. Of course, he's a very big guy at the top, young guy, with a lot of, inspiration, vision. He was brought up in a kind of environment. I was brought up in some way. And I think he is facing a lot of challenges, you know, because he cannot solve Ethiopia's problems overnight. He solved some problems with the neighbors, but I think we should support that initiative now, in terms of contributing ideas, having specifically what I would like to do with this award is perhaps create dialogue between the younger generation, especially around peace, about history, identity, because a lot of our guys who were born and bred outside are also asking themselves, who am I? Where am I going? What am I going to do? I don't have that problem, by the way, because at least I could keep dreaming about one day we're going to go home. Maybe when you get when you're dead, God forbid, you get buried there. At least those ideas, because that has to do with your identity. You got a piece of land. I mean, we live in Archway. The Irish do it all the time. Whenever someone is dead, they take them back to Ireland. So the question of land being attached has something to do with your upbringing. But our young generation, in a way, is lost. In so many ways, they are asking questions, and I think I'm hoping to engage with the youth, here internationally, and have a discussion about, the future of the region, perhaps some champions who would look up at the life of, Desmond Tutu, for example, that kind of approach I would like to promote. But I think the reconciliation challenge is ongoing, and it will never end.
Yes, so anyone from the floor have any questions for Zeremariam? Thank you. Do you want to just say your name, please, before? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Awa. I have a question on something you mentioned just at the end. When you started Penha, that was nearly 30 years ago. And the situation in the region then and the situation in the region now is completely different. And a lot has changed. But you came with a spirit that was very radical, and you wanted to start this very radical tradition. How do you see Penha continuing that radical spirit, and where do you see Penha in the next 30 years, hopefully in the future?
I think the short answer to that, it would depend on people like yourself, the diaspora generation, born and bred outside, and people like me could be part of the story, I mean, I very much, the whole story is a story to tell. The civilization, the people to people, the history, the art is there. It hasn't gone anywhere, So I think Penha's future has a lot to do with this generation having an identity, a belief in itself, but also different to us. Because, when we are, in fact, in Penha, we coined a term called Venceremos. That generation is the we shall win generation. If you look at all the political dogmas we've been through, thanks to Mao, Marx, all various schools of thought in that way. The victory to the masses kind of ideology that you give your commitment, totality in that sense, So if you look at and the liberation wars at the time, people who just went out to fight, there was a cause, all the commitment, and very little materialism in a sense, complete dedication to a cause. And I think we kind of belong to that generation. Coming back to your question, I think, yes, Penha will have a future for 3 reasons. One is there is a legacy, there is a reference point. I think we can be a very important reference point, for you, people like yourself, we could look back and say, well, and then you can also remold it as an organization which suits your situation, as we have done. Because we looked at it as a rallying point, and I think that regionalization of Penha, many people from the Horn, for example, reside in the UK, I mean, young generation, what we call the fish and chips generation, born and bred in London, sophisticated, know very little about the region. There is that kind of missing link. So if you have the link, and then you also got a lot of knowledge you can give back to our countries. The Penha channel is there. We are linked with institutions, with NGOs in the region. The name is there, the Penha flag is there. So I think you people can use it. You can be connected. Those of you who want to be connected to some of your, to share some of your experiences, for example, and modernize Penha. It needs to change because the raison d'etre, the rationale for it has changed now. Obviously, we for instance, when we started it, there was no idea that's going to be a third, fourth generation here, you know. That wasn't there. So I think this is now the opportunity. Our institutions in the countries are growing, universities, academic, whether they're businesses, they're all coming, you know, they're evolving. There's also a generation like yours on the other side, you know. If you look at all these revolutions recently, they are led by the youth, you know. Ethiopia, for example, recently, the youth had a major role to play. So I just want to say that you can move Penha forward, but in a kind of keeping the legacy in some ways, but, you know, reshape it and own it as well. So I am also throwing back the question at you, Ao.
Some of your work as Zere, as a lecturer at UCL, has involved taking students to Peru. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that experience and how that fits into the picture.
Yeah, that's a very good point, by the way. I've been working at UCL for the last 15 years now. So, I mean, which has been a fantastic experience for me because it's an exposure, you know, because in your world, you are just same old, you know, fights, fundraising, boring, you know, talking to people about the same thing all the time. It can actually drain you, you know. But the academic environment is very important because you are out of your normal work. And I had the pleasure of going to Peru, for example, among others, Japan, meeting a lot of, some of them are here now from Brazil and other countries as well. So we have, I've been doing two things. I think at UCL, I've been promoting the positive part of the Horn, you know, that we are not just a bunch of starving aid victims, famine, the image, you know. I was actually reversing it. And I take students to Ethiopia, for example, for trips, to Uganda. So I was doing it kind of, I was selling the Horn in a positive way. It's Africa. And I wasn't doing, I mean, a bit of propaganda sometimes. But actually, basically, yes, I was presenting a positive. This is very important because, you know, I'll give you an example. When we had our first visit to Ethiopia 10 years ago, I asked the students to look at the website and find out more information about. They came back with Bob Geldof, you know the famine at the time, and I was actually shocked. You know, can't you just find something else? You know, this is the image, because you know the biblical famine. You know, a big word, biblical famine. I mean, this is the kind of image we have, and I think what I've done at our department is to change that image, and also bring Penha. You know, some people like ours here. I haven't forgotten you. And Anna, what we do is every year we recruit 2 or 3 former students from UCL, and they've been a great asset. They could be from Japan, from Mexico, from Africa, from all the places. So in a way, you are also promoting a positive image of Penha because they work with you, they gain some experience, they become part of it. So that's really the internationalization. And I should have said this. I think you could also internationalize Penha. Take it out of its current, you know, more or less close in a way. I think you can internationalize it work, you can internationalize issues, you can internationalize the new programs as such. We're really hoping now to raise some funds for a youth program in the UK, you know, so that Penha becomes also relevant internationally.
Yeah, could you just mention though about the Peru and how that knowledge that you got from rural communities in Peru, you've been able to transfer that to communities in Africa?
It's a very good. Actually, I was trying to be modest. I just published the book recently. What is going? You can check it on UCL Press. You can download it. This is. I'm very fond of indigenous knowledge systems and how a lot of the communities own deep knowledge, technological knowledge in many aspects, not just word of mouth. But I was particularly interested in the knowledge systems of a particular cattle owning group in Eritrea and Western Sudan, and I wrote a book about them. But before I did that, the visit to Peru, I was able to relate to other knowledge systems, definitely having visited the Inca civilization, and I realized that, you know, the production system, some of the issues. So what I did was, when I wrote this book, I was partly inspired by Peru, because I actually saw some of these indigenous knowledge systems in action, you know, breeding animals, but then I was able to compare it to the African experience. So in a way that has motivated my motivation in a sense. So this is another issue as well. I think in Africa, we have tremendous knowledge, indigenous knowledge, whether it's medicine, whether it's animals, whether it's crops, whether it's artifacts, whatever it is. What we haven't done is we have been so much copying the Western technology, unfortunately, and really to the detriment of the indigenous knowledge systems we have. For instance, the study I did on cattle owning, I went through, because of my agricultural background, I was able to compare and contrast a conventional knowledge system like what we have here and the indigenous knowledge systems out there. And I realized that, in fact, there's a tremendous pool of knowledge which I have not really dug into, whether it's medicine, African medicine, for example. Look at the Chinese, I mean, if you are a Chinese practitioner of Chinese medicine in London, I am one of them. It costs you a fortune, because they are organized. They're able to sell the knowledge, make out a lot of money out of it, although the National Health Service does not recognize it, again, as a knowledge, by the way. Do you know this? They're not officially recognized as an alternative medicine still. They're trying to get that kind of license, but they can open a shop anywhere in town. So I think this is also a potential for the African knowledge systems to dig into them and acknowledge them. Our universities can do a lot of work in the countries, and I've been quite influential in this idea. When you go to this university in our region, you can talk about knowledge systems, indigenous, and et cetera, et cetera. So.
Thank you. Any further questions from the floor?
Well, Sagad Abeba, I'm the chair of the trustee. Congratulations, Zere, on the award. It is well deserved. Well, I think, as you are aware, the region, the Horn, has changed both politically, economically, environmentally. As you rightly said it at the introduction, even politically now, the tension between the countries in the Horn has also become very better than it was before. As we talk, well, the president of Eritrea was in Ethiopia inaugurating a sugar factory with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy. So it seems that there is an opportunity to do more on peace and reconciliation in the region. And of course, as you are aware, well, there has also been a bilateral discussion and a trilateral agreement between Somalia, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, and the rest in the whole. Well, that is the context we are in. As it was said earlier on, now, in this context, with the climate change, people have also changed. They are shifting from one area of getting their livelihood to others. Well, for example, the pastoralists have become, in some places, farmers. Where there is access to water, where they have also become fishers. So, well, if these are the dynamics in the region, and when I see the name, it says Pastoral and Environmental Network in the Horn of Africa, it looks like it is exclusive. But do you think that Desmond Tutu would accept this? Because if we are talking of reconciliation, if we are talking of peace, it should really be inclusive. And we have to really talk about all, not only the pastoralists. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. But I just, a couple of comments very briefly before I go to the Penha mission and the name. I think my argument was, my view would be, it's all right for all our politicians to shake hands and, but I go much deeper into that because I think we need to address some of the underlying causes. There are two things, One is damage is done. Damage is done. I mean, if I tell you something about the Ethiopian-Eritrean war, we are talking about 100,000 youngsters dying on both sides, just the army alone, So this is what I'm talking about. While I appreciate the political rapprochement, if you want it, fine, it's welcome. In fact, the unblocking is welcome. But I think we have a lot of work to do. That's my view. I think we shouldn't fool ourselves in terms of, because politicians also change, you know. They could change. They could have the arguments at the top, like before. And I think we need to, as citizens of that region, we need to really analyze what caused those conflicts in the first place, and how can we actually, you know, if you ask me what I would have loved to see in all that border areas between Ethiopia and Eritrea, if there be a peace kind of monuments, you know, recognizing the loss of life on both sides, so that people can say never to war again. That's what I'm talking about. I think this is important because actually sometimes, if I may be honest, it's convenience for politicians to say everything is okay. I don't think everything is okay in our region. There's a lot of damage has been done, and we need to work towards rehabilitating not only the environment, but the thinking, the mentality, the consequences. We have consequences, you know. That would be my comment on, but I welcome the peace. I welcome the initiatives. I welcome the rapprochement, you know. But I would just with that additional responsibility, and that's where peace and reconciliation comes. Coming back to your point of about Penha, yes, I think the reason why this Penha and myself were selected as the only winner for this year is basically what the board saw was a link between Penha's regional work in bringing people together from the various countries, from various backgrounds, but without stating being a peace group to actually implement a lot of peaceful initiatives. That's why I think being an instrument of peace in that way was appreciated, you know. But you're right, I agree with you. I mean, I come from a small farming family back home, you know. I'm very happy to say that. But if you ask me now to look after the land or milk the goats, I can't do it. I'm no longer in that. So people evolve. I agree with you. Pastoralism is also evolving, and I think the new Penha, and now comes to our question, I think we need to address this, you know. Do we widen it now as a regional organization? We kind of reorganize ourselves in terms of the mission? Why not, you know? It's changing. So I think there's no room for dogma as such. But I think the only focus, and I argue that pastoralists are still, within these marginalized communities, are still in danger for two reasons. One is, if you look at land grabbing and whose land is being grabbed in our countries, it happens to be mostly the pastoral dryland areas. If you look at the opportunity for pastoralist people in terms of education, in terms of social protection, for example, the idea of, you know, one thing fits all kind of thing, where you have educational systems which are very sedentary. I come from a sedentary community, so sedentary education would do us nicely. But in communities where you also need to help the evolution in a way, you know, by providing mobile health clinics, mobile health services, and to acknowledge it as a way of life is quite important. But I think, to be honest with you, all of you who know this farming system is in our countries, we are still using technology which is 2,000 years old, you know. We are using oxen, we are threshing the corn. If you read the Bible, you know, where it says, when you use oxen to thresh the corn, don't muzzle them, you know. So we are still go to our highlands, you know. It's quite amazing. So what is so special about the highland farming system? I mean, I ask the same, say myself, because those communities also need the same interventions, you know, the same development in many ways. So I guess, do we call it Penha? Do we call it something else? That's part of the evolution. At least for the last 30 years, it has done a job. It has had the focus. So if a new Penha wants to remodel itself, by all means.
Hi, any other questions?
My name is Abdulrazak Muhammad. I am Research Associate of Penha. I would like to ask two questions. One is, since you started advocating for pastoralist communities and pastoralist issues 30 years ago, how do you see it now, where the pastoralist issue lies at the moment, at regional level and international level? And can you say something about the argument about pastoralism is not developable, not sustainable way of life, that argument, can you comment on it? Thank you.
First one is what's happening to pastoralism, and the second one is pastoralism sustainable? I mean, that's what I get from you. Okay, yes, it is evolving. I mean, I can give you an example. When we were in Afar in Ethiopia, Nicole and I, one area is quite amazing. So we're talking to this young herder, you know, an Afar kid in Awash, and I was just talking to him, you know, what are your ambitions? And luckily there was a plane passing over, you know, over the skies, and he said, I would like to be a pilot, you know. So I think this is very important, that a lot of these communities now are not as isolated as they were many years ago, many decades ago. I mean, there are very important issues in terms of access to the market, connection to the market. In some countries, in the political struggles and the liberation struggles, in fact, they fought, you know. They were leaders in some of these countries, very much. So the political marginalization sometimes is probably exaggerated, you know. They fought in these liberation wars. And the changes for me are really threefold. One is there is dynamic change within society itself, you know. That is to say, you know, your kids could be with some relatives in Kassala getting education, and half of the family might be mobile with the animals, you know. There's a change. This is a change is blowing. I think we don't catch that change, though. This is the problem we have as academics or practitioners. You know, we don't really catch the process of change itself. Very little is actually known about what happens, what's happening at household level. Secondly, is the economic integration. You can see very clearly now the cross-border markets, you know, people are trading goods and services, etc., etc. So there's more integration, I would say. There's also in the political system, in some countries, certainly, the constitutions recognize pastoralism as a livelihood. They also have politicians, parliamentarians. For example, we carried out studies on the pastoral parliamentarian groups in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. They are represented, you know, they have constituency. I think it's very important to recognize that the constituency, their political involvement is there. I think on the challenge, as I said before, it's just this question of resources, you know. Some of these wars, whether they're high level or low level, fought in many pastoral areas. Some of the big international companies are grabbing land in our countries. Some of the local elites would invade, you know, pastoral areas. So there is a threat in that way. There's a lot of threats in that. I can go on and on about that. Is pastoralism sustainable? Is a very good question. As a Somali, probably you argue it's sustainable. But yes, you're also changing. For example, I'm sure, Abdurazak, your parents are probably nomadic at one point. You are not anymore, you know. And I think sometimes we tend to fool ourselves with this whole sentiment that this is the way of life, it's how it should be, it should remain. It doesn't work like that. I think the sustainability of pastoralism could be also evolutionary. For instance, around Jijiga in Ethiopia, now there are camels, you know, and the nomads are coming to town. They're saying, give us animal feed so that we can give you milk. So it's also a conscious transition. In terms of what else can you do with these rangelands, vast rangelands, other than livestock? It's a good question, you know. I don't think you can use that kind of land. I mean, in some cases there are minerals. In the case of Afari region in Ethiopia and Eritrea, there is potash, there is phosphate, etc., etc. Other areas are also in the same situation. So, would the pastors benefit from that? Would it be an alternative for pastoralism for them? Those things are to be seen. So and I also remember, we should not go on and on about pastoralism all the time. I believe that rural livelihoods are important. For instance, if you look at the actual scenarios in many countries, what I call Highland poverty in terms of lack of land, you know, if you're a family of 10 and you only have a couple of hectares, what are you going to do? That kind of land, lack of land resources also pushes you to go to the pastoral areas. I think we need to appreciate first is the relationship between the pastoralist communities and the other peasant groups. This is very common throughout the region. And secondly, I think we should also have a strategy which encompasses those communities, because I think the idea that somehow it is the pastors who are marginalized and not the others are actually not very true. Some of the studies done on social protection in Ethiopia, for example, clearly shows that some of the highland areas are marginalized, equally marginalized in terms of poverty. And we need to take that into account so that you look for a balance. And if I was going to think of a new Penha, I think we should accommodate those highland conditions, because there is poverty in the highland areas. And in that way, you can be fair to both sides.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that Penha works in two ways, really. It works at a community level, empowering communities to have their own voice over their future, their livelihoods. But we also look at how that can then feed into policy. So it's kind of two levels. And one of the very important programs that our Somaliland team are doing is women's political participation. So recently they had a training on training up women leaders to speak out for their rights, advocacy training, and so bridging that gap so that in effect we are empowering the next generation.
We are very proud of what you achieved so far. In terms of Penha, considering the situation in our region at the time, if this goes on to the positive way, do you think Penha should move its office to our region?
Yeah, it's. I think, maybe 20 years ago I would say yes, let's have a big regional office, a big institute where we can all retire. I mean, that's. But I think if you think of Penha being a catalyst, catalyst in terms of infiltrating the ideology among our political leaders, institutions, we've been a catalyst, When we started, there was no talk about training on livelihood, about the nomads, very little about research and policy, etc., etc. So I think the idea of Penha creating an empire, although this is left to the next generation, its own institute out there, might not be that relevant, Because if you catalyze these institutions, we can do with an international office, by the way, there's still very important connections, You can become an ambassador. Because in our countries, when we have a big, we got enough institutions, We got a lot of competent institutions. The software and hardware. I think the software is what's needed. Ideas, experiences, sharing experiences, and in terms of policy formation, knowledge from elsewhere, that sort of. But institutions are there. In Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Uganda, Somalia, we have a lot of institutions. Even in Somaliland, I was arguing with some friends that there are too many universities, probably a bit less, So there are institutions there, which is very positive, by the way. So I think I for one, wouldn't see Penha trying to become a big empire, because those ambitions probably had their day, We had a big office in Ethiopia, a central office, and etc., etc. But if you want to, I would recommend the kind of catalyst approach, where you engage with institutions, you bring a breed of generations doing their PhDs in the universities in our countries, because I think a lot of them don't even do that, I was challenging some guys in Tigray when I went to Mekelle University. Perhaps the students could do a lot more research about farmers' livelihoods, which are only 5 kilometers away, rather than imagining interventions from elsewhere. You can actually do things there. So my view is just simply Penha should continue to be a catalyst. And that's really my view. It doesn't represent the view of the organization, but that's what I think.
Hi, any other questions?
Hi, my name is Simon. Hi, my name is Simon. Congratulations, first of all, Dr. Zermariam. My question is with regards nomad lives around the lowlands area mainly around the Afar region or Somalia. Is there any opportunity for them to settle if there is the right intervention from governments? Is there any possibilities to settle in different areas rather than keep living nomadic lives?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good comment, you know, and I think I would say that perception is something which we need to address. First one, mobility is a requirement for everybody. The long-range migration, we are migrated here, what are we doing, you know? I mean, going to greener pastures. The idea of mobility, the idea of nomadism in its wider global sense, you know, just so when you put it in the what you call nomadic context, I would like to put it in slightly different too, because a lot of these communities actually, in the rural areas, certainly in the sedentary highland areas, for example, there is mobility, but it's a different form of mobility, you know. It's a different. You move from one fixed abode, you move and come back to it seasonally. You know, you might be working in town. You might be a farmer where there is no rains, you know. You go out the nearest town to work, you know. And this is very common in Asmara, for example, you know, industries, people used to work. Actually, during the rainy season, they are farmers, you know. This is a common pattern. Coming back on the nomadism, number one, there are changes. This is what I was saying earlier, you know. Number two, governments have tried what I call settlement by inducement. I give you the sweets, I give you the, you know, I mean, sweets, not in sweets, but actually education, health facilities, I say to you. But look, if I am honest with you, there's a fundamental arrogance. It's like me, I was brought up out in my hometown. We had a horticultural family. We grew fruits and vegetables, and I love it, you know. I would like everyone to do the same. But, you know, the thing is, whatever livelihood there is, we need to help it to evolve, to support it, to change, you know. Like in our settled communities, the biggest advantage was education. That's all. We didn't have any other thing especially, you know. But it helped us to move forward. So in the case of nomadism, first of all, let's appreciate there are changes already. Changes because there's conflict in an area, they're forced to settle down. They can't move, you know. The same for the farmers, for the rural communities. So that's what you call settlement by default. They are settling by default, you know. Many of them are actually now settled by default, not by design. Secondly, the governments are also trying to encourage them, you know, build schools for them. That's also attracting some of them. I mean, some of them are taking advantage of that. There is also hardcore, you know, who say, this is my way of life. I want to keep it as long as it lasts. This is true. This is also true for the farmer, you know. Some members of my family are still stuck in their horticulture, you know. They think it's the best way of life, you know. So I think this is, I just want to tell you, the sedentarization is happening in so many ways, but very different ways, you know. What I'm trying to say is there is a livelihood, it's changing, it's threatened, and I put it in the wider context. The same goes for the peasant farmers. They're also changing dramatically, you know. So there's, but as I said to you, the land grabbing is forcing them as well, you know, because you are disowning the piece of land they have. So what do? They settle down. So I think the trend is towards settlement, but the strategies are different. You can do it voluntarily. You can settle around town to sell milk seasonally. You know, there are all these, well, we need to study all these things. I mean, it's an never ending. If you want to do your PhD, you're welcome to do that.
Just if I can follow up on what you have really started. It is not a question of right. Well, the nomads have a right to live and decide how they live, rather than the policymakers or government to force them. Yeah, okay, thanks. Well, so it's not their right that they have to choose how they live rather than being forced to settle. Well, I'm sorry, I have to say, well, I have been one of those people who have been unconsciously, without being aware, that we have said that during the old days that it is good for them if they can settle. But I think when you see it from rights perspective, it is the rights of the people to decide how they should live and where they should live, and nobody should really determine their way of life. So, well, how do you see this?
Well, that's a bit of a tricky question. You know? I think rights is, I would argue it in two ways. The same rights are also true for the peasant groups who are equally poor in so many ways, you know. I think I agree with you. I think livelihood rights is about life for everybody, should be for everybody, that's to start with. But secondly, I think our own perception of this way of life being static and not changing is what we need to ask ourselves. And that's why the in-depth studies we're looking into, you know, first of all, there isn't really a kind of one type of nomadism, you know. One type of nomadism. There isn't one type. It is conditioned by the ecological setting, you know, in a way. So you could have extensive kind of nomadism from West Africa to East Africa, and you know, the Mbororos of Nigeria migrated to Sudan 200 years ago. You know, that long-range nomadism. That's not happening now, you know. In the 60s, in the 50s, it was happening. So long-range nomadism does not happen anymore for all sorts of reasons. So that's what I meant by the default. And I don't think you can do much about that, because if there's a conflict in a region, then the question of livelihood rights becomes a bit tricky, you know. The second thing is, what do they think themselves? My experience, like that little kid I told you, I was wishing for him to remain a herder, you know, with his lovely barefooted walking around the goats. Then who am I to say to him, by the way, your right is just to stay as a herder forever? No, I asked him, he said to me, I would like to be a pilot, you know. And this is what I'm talking about. I think there isn't really a kind of this livelihood changes. I mean, my life has changed, you know. As a kid, I end up where I am because of the educational opportunities. What I'm trying to say is, if the pastoralist communities also have a proper educational system which suits their situation, they will change, you know, and the change will be up to them. And I think the problem is the policymakers have got the perception what kind of change. And rights, yes, but I mean, if rights means these people, you know, being forced to stick to that way of life, like this kid I'm telling you about, like me telling him, look, by the way, no, it's your right to remain a pastoralist. I think that's what I'm kind of trying to get at. The evolution needs to be appreciated, to be studied. And I think many of the NGOs included, you know, I don't think we really got in depth of that kind of knowledge, you know, what is changing, where is it changing, what are the implications, you know? And I think that's not really happening. There are some studies, but actually this process of change in very different ecological contexts I'm talking about. What's different in Eritrea is different in Sudan. For example, if you take Yoweri Museveni, who comes from a group called Bahima in southwestern Uganda, where I used to work, and he was saying, well, we have to settle them down, you know? This is the, if you like, people from the nomadic origins, you know, themselves promoting also sedentarization, and I think this is true in many other situations, you know. The educated elite, for instance, are saying, you know, you want to keep us as nomadic because you want to rule us in the way you like, you know, which is, I think, it's the question. We need to think about it. But I am not a nomad. I'm only an advocate for them, and advocates can be wrong, you know.
There's a huge market now, and the Middle East, just I think that's been the case for some time now, but
That's right.
that could also change the whole setup of marketing meat. Do you think that there will be pressure on people to, for example, open up abattoirs so that the meat is actually killed in the Horn and then sent over? Is that a trend you could see happening? And is it something that you would kind of advocate against because it would change the whole way of life for the nomadic pastoralist?
Well, I just want to say, I mean, the value addition in this pastoral economy is very important, you know, because we got thousands and thousands of livestock on hoof exported to the Middle East with very little returns to the communities themselves. Firstly, in many of our countries, actually, the the peasant communities, studies show in Ethiopia, for example, that the livestock ownership, in fact, very much compares with the livestock ownership of the lowland areas in terms of nomadic ownership and peasant ownership. So the idea that you have value addition to pastoralism and small-scale production in country is very important. We are not doing that, you know. I think this is something which potentially could bring more money to these communities, you know, in their pockets. And I think the new Penha, I hope, you know, rather than advocating as we used to bring the value addition, the economics part of pastoralism, the land rights, you know, for them to be able to produce more animals, you know, improving their breeds as well. That discussion should we have, definitely, you know, in our countries, because I think they're losing out, because the Arabs are actually not interested, most of them get New Zealand lamb, you know, from New Zealand or Australia, so our animals probably don't sell well, if you like. So why not turn that opportunity within our region, where I think pastoralism still contributes greatly. If you look at all these campaigns, the region is still rich in livestock, you know. I mean, we talk about grain shortages, but actually livestock products, you know. The region is, if anything, during droughts, what kills pastoralism is the prices going down during drought, you know. This is really what's undermining the pastoral system itself, because it's not able to destock, it's not able to sell whatever they have in drought, because everyone sells the same animals, you know. So I think there's a lot of marketing issues, a lot of, if we'd like to see rights in that context, and the economic rights, you know, that sort of issue, land rights, and then if these people want to change, want to move to another way of life, we should welcome it. That's my view.
Thank you. Well, we're closing soon. Anyone would like to add a question? Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. Also, please take a look round at these wonderful artworks, which we commissioned about 10 years ago, Zere? 20 years ago, which are now going to be put up for sale or auction. They depict some of the pastoral scenes, as you can see. There's also a form here if you'd like to sign up to our membership, keep abreast of our events, and please, you know, we welcome your input into the future of Penha, because we're now at a crossroads, as we said, and it's very important that we take lots of different views on board. So thank you very much for coming.